The courtroom had seen arrogance before, but no one inside those four walls was ready for the words that spilled out of Karen's mouth that day. She didn't walk in like a woman looking for justice. She walked in like a ruler parading through her conquered land. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes brimming with contempt, she radiated the smugness of someone who believed rules bent to her will. But what she unleashed next wasn't just arrogance. It was poison, sharp and deliberate, hurled straight at the one person you'd think no one would dare to cross. With a smirk twisting her lips, she leaned forward and spat the words that froze the entire room. "You're not even a real judge. You're a fake." The sound of it cracked through the silence like glass shattering on marble. The gallery gasped. The attorneys stiffened. Even the bailiff's eyes flicked up in disbelief, as if he needed to check whether he'd truly heard it. For a moment, the air itself seemed to pause, heavy with the audacity of the insult. It wasn't just an attack on Judy's character. It was a declaration meant to strip her of everything she represented: authority, respect, fear, and the decades of discipline that had made her a legend. Karen wasn't simply mouthing off. She was pulling the trigger on a war she thought she could win. And yet Judy didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes or slam her gavel. She sat still, her expression unreadable, her silence louder than any outburst could have been. That stillness, that calculated calm, was the first sign to anyone paying attention. Judy wasn't caught off guard. She was loading her weapon. The insult fake judge didn't just hang in the air. It slithered, choking the space between them, feeding Karen's belief that she had landed the blow of the century. To the casual eye, Judy's silence might have looked like weakness, the first crack in her unshakable reputation. But the people who knew her, the lawyers, the clerks, the viewers who had followed her for years, understood something Karen never would. Judy never wasted her first strike. She let the silence ferment, let arrogance swell like a balloon until it was ready to burst with one decisive pinprick. This was no ordinary case, and this was no ordinary insult. Karen's words weren't just reckless, they were suicidal. She had stepped into Judy's domain, the one arena where power was not measured by volume or money, but by the razor edge of intellect and authority. Calling Judy a fake judge was like mocking a lioness in her own den. The outcome was inevitable, but Karen, blinded by her ego, couldn't see it yet. Because here's the truth the courtroom didn't know in that frozen moment. Karen had more to lose than just her pride. Behind the sneer, behind the insult, behind her self-declared power, there was a secret she thought no one could touch. But Judy already had her sights on it. And before this day was done, that secret, her prized $1 million mansion, would be ripped right out from under her. So sit back and pay attention, because what started with a single insult would spiral into one of the sharpest, most humiliating takedowns Judy had ever delivered. Before I show you how Judy flipped this case into one of the most shocking courtroom takedowns ever, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these unbelievable showdowns. To anyone watching from the outside, Karen's words might have sounded like nothing more than another courtroom outburst. After all, litigants had shouted at Judy before. They had insulted her decisions, questioned her fairness, even hurled accusations meant to rattle her composure. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't frustration boiling over. This was deliberate, sharp, and aimed not at Judy's ruling, but at the very foundation of who she was. Calling Judge Judy a fake judge wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge to her crown, to the authority she carried not only in that courtroom but across decades of building a legacy. That single phrase struck at the invisible order that held the room together: respect. Respect for the robe, respect for the bench, respect for the system itself. And in that instant, Karen wasn't just attacking Judy. She was attacking the institution Judy represented. That's why the stakes were so high. If Judy brushed it off, if she let silence speak too long without striking back, Karen's insult would become something more than words. It would become a precedent, a dangerous permission slip for every arrogant soul who thought they could swagger into a courtroom, spit venom, and walk out with a smirk. Judy's silence would echo louder than Karen's insult, and the echo wouldn't stay locked in those four walls. Clips would circulate, whispers would spread, and the story would grow. Judge Judy got called a fake, and she had no answer. Imagine it. Decades of reputation, built case by case, glare by glare, comeback by comeback, suddenly overshadowed by one unanswered insult. The woman who had silenced liars, dismantled arrogance, and carved her name into television history would suddenly be painted as vulnerable, even weak. The courtroom would remember not Judy's authority but her silence, and that silence would gnaw at her throne. But if Judy responded, if she came back with the sharpness she was known for, the stakes flipped entirely. Karen wouldn't leave the courtroom as a victor, or even a litigant who dared to cross the judge. She would leave as an example, a living, breathing warning to anyone who thought arrogance could win against wit, discipline, and true authority. and that's what made the tension inside that room unbearable. The air was thick with anticipation. The audience leaned forward in their seats. The attorneys, usually buried in paperwork or rehearsing their next objection, had frozen mid-motion, eyes locked on Judy. Even the bailiff, stone-faced and trained to maintain composure, stood just a little straighter, as though bracing for impact. Everyone was waiting for the inevitable, but Judy didn't rush. She didn't snap back immediately or wave off the insult with a dismissive hand. That was never her style. She knew the weight of silence. She knew that when used right, silence could turn a simple insult into a ticking bomb, one that exploded not with noise but with humiliation. And as the seconds stretched on, Karen mistook that silence for victory. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, letting the smirk spread wider across her face. Her body language screamed triumph. She thought Judy had no answer. She thought her insult had landed, that she had stripped Judy's authority with just 2 words, and for a brief, dangerous moment, Karen actually believed she had broken the unbreakable. But what Karen didn't understand was this. Judy wasn't staying quiet because she had no response. She was quiet because she was calculating how to make that response unforgettable. She wasn't protecting her pride. She was defending the sanctity of the bench itself. This wasn't about winning a war of words. It was about preserving the balance of respect that every courtroom depends on. Because if a judge can be mocked without consequence, then the courtroom becomes chaos. And Judy knew it. That's why her silence wasn't weakness and it was strategy. She was letting Karen inflate her own ego, word by word, smirk by smirk, so that when the strike came, it wouldn't just cut. It would collapse everything Karen stood on. The stakes weren't just personal. They were historic. This was about more than one insult, one case, or one Karen. It was about every arrogant personality that had ever strutted into a courtroom thinking they could bend the rules. It was about every entitled voice that thought it could drown out authority. It was about whether respect still mattered in a world where arrogance shouted louder than wisdom. And so the room held its breath. Every second of silence stretched into eternity, magnifying the tension until the air itself seemed to tremble. Would Judy stay silent, letting Karen claim her moment of dominance? Or would she unleash the kind of response that would remind the world why her name had become legend? Those were the stakes, and everyone knew it. To understand why Karen strutted into that courtroom with such venom on her tongue, you have to understand the world she came from. She wasn't just another entitled litigant who had a bad day. She was the queen of her neighborhood, not because of charm, kindness, or respect, but because of fear. As the self-appointed tyrant of her homeowners association, Karen thrived on power. Not real power earned through leadership, but the kind carved out of petty rules, fines, and intimidation. On paper, she was just an HOA president. In reality, she ruled her subdivision like a dictator. Neighbors whispered her name with resentment, groaning when her pastel SUV rolled down the street. For Karen, every chipped fence, every slightly overgrown lawn, every car parked an inch too far from the curb was a battlefield, and she was always ready for war. She had fined retirees for leaving their trash cans out an hour too long. She had shamed single parents for having toys in their front yard. She had ordered families to repaint their homes, not because they were in disrepair, but because the color didn't match her vision. Her hunger for control knew no limit, and the fines she collected didn't just enforce rules, they fattened her purse. She wielded authority not as a duty, but as a weapon, squeezing every ounce of profit and submission she could from her neighbors. In her world, Karen was untouchable. No one dared confront her head-on because they knew the storm she could unleash. People sold their homes rather than face her harassment. Others swallowed their anger in silence, hoping to avoid becoming her next target. Karen fed off that silence. To her, it was proof that she had won, that her power was absolute. So when she walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, she carried herself the same way she did on her neighborhood streets, shoulders back, eyes flashing, convinced that no one could challenge her authority. In her mind, Judy wasn't a judge at all. She was just another obstacle, another rule enforcer Karen could shout down, mock, and bulldoze with sheer arrogance. But what Karen failed to see was that this wasn't her HOA meeting, and these weren't her neighbors. This was Judy's courtroom. The queen of her cul-de-sac was about to learn what happens when pretend power collides with the real thing. To understand the weight of Karen's insult, you have to understand the woman she hurled it at. Judge Judy wasn't just another judge in a black robe. She was a force of nature, a legend carved out of decades spent dismantling arrogance and exposing lies with surgical precision. From her earliest days as a prosecutor in New York, Judy had built a reputation for being relentless. While other attorneys softened their tone or sidestepped confrontation, she leaned into it. She thrived on cutting through excuses, stripping down the lies, and revealing the raw truth beneath. By the time she took her seat on the bench, Judy had become more than a judge, she had become an institution. Her voice could silence a room without ever raising in volume. Her glare alone was enough to freeze the most brazen defendant mid-sentence. And her reputation stretched far beyond the courtroom walls. Millions tuned in not just for justice but for Judy herself. The way she could reduce the most arrogant personality to silence with nothing but a few carefully chosen words. She wasn't feared because she shouted. She was feared because she never needed to. That's why Karen's insult was so reckless. Because Judge Judy's power was not about theatrics or intimidation. It was about discipline. Every word Judy spoke carried weight because she never wasted them. Every pause was calculated, every silence intentional. She knew that the right word, delivered at the right moment, could cut deeper than any outburst. And so when Karen sneered "fake judge" across the courtroom, Judy didn't leap to defend herself. She let the words hang there. She let the silence ferment. It wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Judy was letting Karen believe she had won, letting the arrogance swell, letting the smirk widen, letting the ego inflate so large it would collapse under its own weight. It was the oldest weapon in her arsenal, the art of restraint. This was the contrast that defined the showdown. Karen's chaos versus Judy's discipline. Karen barked, mocked, and spewed venom, mistaking noise for strength. Judy stayed still, her silence louder than Karen's insults. And that silence turned the room into a pressure cooker. Every second that passed tightened the coil, pulled the audience further to the edge of their seats and made the eventual strike inevitable. Because that's what everyone was waiting for. The attorneys, the bailiff, the gallery, even the viewers at home. All of them leaned forward, holding their breath, knowing what was coming. Judy's silence wasn't weakness. It was the storm before the thunder. And when she finally opened her mouth, it wouldn't just be a response. It would be a counterstrike powerful enough to shatter Karen's arrogance in front of the world. Judy knew it. The audience knew it, and deep down beneath the bravado, Karen was starting to sense it too. Karen's first insult had been shocking, but the silence that followed emboldened her. She mistook Judy's restraint for surrender, the calm before her eyes as weakness. Folding her arms across her chest, she leaned back in her chair like a conqueror, surveying a battlefield, and then with a smirk curling deeper, she spat it out again, louder this time, making sure the entire courtroom heard it. "You're a fake judge," she sneered, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Everyone knows it. You're nothing but a fraud in a robe." The gasp that rippled through the room was even sharper than before. The gallery exchanged nervous glances. The bailiff shifted, his jaw tightening. Even the lawyers, normally unshaken by theatrics, stiffened as the words sank in. Karen had crossed the invisible line from disrespect to outright defiance, a line no one had dared cross so brazenly in Judy's courtroom. And then it happened. Judy moved. Slowly, deliberately, she adjusted her glasses and leaned forward, her eyes locking on Karen like a hawk zeroing in on its prey. The silence cracked like thunder as Judy's voice finally filled the room. "Fake judge," she said, her tone calm, almost amused. "That's the best you can do?" The room erupted with a nervous chuckle, but Judy wasn't smiling. Her eyes never left Karen's face. "Let me tell you something, ma'am. The only thing fake in this courtroom is the respect you think you're owed." Karen's smirk faltered, but Judy wasn't finished. She leaned in closer, her words slicing with surgical precision. "You see, I didn't earn this seat with arrogance. I earned it with years of discipline, years of cases, years of people exactly like you walking in here thinking, volume equals truth. But do you know what else I've earned? Knowledge." The gallery stilled. Judy's voice sharpened, each word striking like a gavel. "And my knowledge tells me you're not just disrespectful. You're a fraud yourself. You've spent years as an HOA president, bullying your neighbors, handing out fines like candy and lining your pockets while families suffered. You walk into this courtroom calling me fake? No, ma'am. The fraud is you." Gasps broke out across the gallery. Karen's face turned crimson, her smug grin melting into horror as whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Judy hadn't just defended her authority. She had turned the spotlight on Karen, exposing her corruption, her greed, and the reputation she thought she had buried outside those courtroom doors. "And here's the difference between us," Judy said, her voice steady, commanding. "You use power to intimidate. I use it to protect. You call yourself a leader because people are too exhausted to fight you. But here, in my courtroom, your kingdom doesn't exist. And today you're not a president or a bully or a queen. You're just another arrogant voice about to be silenced by the truth." The gallery erupted. Some laughed, others gasped, but all eyes were glued to Karen. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The smirk had vanished, replaced with trembling lips and darting eyes that betrayed her unraveling composure. Karen had come in convinced she could strip Judy of her authority. Instead, Judy had stripped Karen of her dignity. If you think Judy's words were brutal, wait until you hear what happened next. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. because the fallout of this case shocked everyone. The courtroom was still buzzing from Judy's blistering comeback when she shifted from words to action. Most thought the takedown would end with humiliation, that Karen's punishment would be public ridicule alone. But Judy wasn't a woman who dealt in half measures. She didn't just silence arrogance. She dismantled it piece by piece, making sure it could never rise again. "Fake judge?" Judy repeated, her voice calm, steady. "Let's talk about what's real. What's real are the complaints piling up against you. What's real are the documents showing you've misused HOA funds. And what's very real are the unpaid judgments with your name all over them." Karen froze. The smirk was gone, her face drained of color as Judy laid out the paper trail. Every hidden fine, every neighbor's testimony, every dollar siphoned through her position was suddenly laid bare in the courtroom for all to hear. The audience murmured, whispers rippling like wildfire, each revelation another nail hammered into the coffin of Karen's authority. Then came the hammer blow. "You thought calling me a fake would weaken this bench," Judy said, her eyes locked on Karen. "But what it's done is force me to pull the curtain back on your fraud. And now, ma'am, you're going to learn that arrogance comes at a cost. Because as of today, your $1 million mansion is no longer yours. It's the property that will settle what you owe." Gasps turned into outright shock. Karen's jaw fell open, her hands trembling on the edge of the table as if she could hold on to the walls of a collapsing empire. For years, she had strutted through her neighborhood as queen of the cul-de-sac, lording her mansion over those she bullied. And in a single ruling, Judy had stripped it from her. The weight of it sank in all at once. Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was ruined. Her reputation shattered, her wealth gutted, her neighbors finally vindicated. The woman who once wielded fines and rules as weapons now sat powerless, exposed for the fraud she was. The queen had been dethroned, not with chaos or screaming, but with cold, undeniable justice. And as the courtroom watched her crumble, one truth became crystal clear. Judge Judy didn't just win battles. She rewrote legacies. Karen's exit was nothing like her entrance. She had marched in with a smirk, convinced she could strip Judy of her authority. But now she waddled out in silence, her head lowered, her once booming voice reduced to nothing but shame. The courtroom that she believed she could dominate no longer feared her. They mocked her, whispered about her downfall, and laughed at the arrogance that had brought her to ruin. Judge Judy didn't just silence an insult. She turned it into a lesson, one that stretched far beyond that single room. Clips would circulate, neighbors would finally breathe easy, and Judy's legend would grow even stronger. This wasn't just another case won. It was a reminder that arrogance, intimidation, and fake power always collapse when confronted with the discipline of true authority. Karen had tried to tear Judy down with words. Instead, Judy seized everything Karen had built on lies, her pride, her reputation, even her mansion. The queen of the cul-de-sac was no more, and Judy's throne remained untouchable. If you loved watching this legendary Judy moment, hit the like button, subscribe for more unforgettable showdowns, and drop a comment with your favorite Judge Judy comeback. Because arrogance never wins when real authority is in the room.